Food, glorious food. We obviously need it to live, but what's staggering is just how many of us it's killing. Enormous appetites have made us the third fattest developed country on earth, and 1 million Australians are now so obese, their only real hope of a normal life is increasingly radical weight loss surgery. If it goes well, there can be extraordinary transformations which prove less really is more. But these operations can be dangerous, especially if you're a teenager like Ashley Young. I first met her 2 years ago when she had to face the risk of dying in order to have a life worth living. Ashley Young is just 14, and her despair is measured in kilograms. She dreams of a skinny girl she has never seen in the mirror. She says her only friend in the world is food.
I'll eat. I'll feel better for a while, but then I'll be sad. So I'll just go and eat again.
What do you feel sad about?
The way I look. I don't want to look like this. When I look in the mirror, I see a million things I'd like to change.
And she's tried to change, dozens of times, with the encouragement and love of her mum, Carol.
It's become a major, major problem in her life. And I feel sad because I tell her every day I love her, whether she's big or small, but that's not enough for her.
When you say you eat, how much are we talking about?
Just everything and anything I could get my hands on.
And what is the voice in your head saying to you as you're doing this?
In my head, I'm mostly telling myself, come on, keep eating. You deserve it. You're fat anyway. You can't get any worse.
This is what we call the fixed portion of the stomach, and this is the greater portion of the stomach. And this thing is designed, Ashley, to expand.
Dr. George Hopkins is an obesity surgeon, considered a maverick by many of his colleagues for performing radical weight loss surgery on young teenagers like Ashley.
Her life and her health are going to deteriorate in young adulthood if we do nothing to a miserable quality of life. This is what actually happens.
Unlike other gastric surgery, gastric sleeving is irreversible. 90% of the stomach is removed, leaving only a narrow sleeve, sometimes as small as 50 millilitres, or the size of a test tube.
Doesn't want to come out.
The operation is relatively new and there have been no studies into its long-term effects.
Yeah, at least I'll lose weight, you know?
Absolutely.
But with Ashley weighing 100 kilos at age 14 and heading for 160 by the time she's 20, Dr. Hopkins firmly believes the time to act is now. Considering that you don't yet know the long-term effects, do you feel like you are experimenting on people like Ashley, on kids?
Yes and no, honestly. But I would say to you, how can I not do this based on the evidence that we've got that suggests that she will do really well with it and really badly without it?
It's one piece of bread. It is not going to kill me.
One piece of bread turns into 10.
The evidence shows that morbidly obese teenagers will only lose 3 kilograms over 6 months, even with the best medical help. By contrast, with surgery, they will lose more than 10 times that amount, 35 to 40 kilograms versus 3.
So that's the dilemma. And if somebody can come out with a weight loss program for 14-year-olds that does better than a sleeve gastrectomy, I won't do it.
And yet many of your colleagues refuse to do it on people as young as 14.
They do. Now, I can't tell another surgeon how to practice, but they're avoiding the hard decisions.
Natasha Walker was a big baby and her weight spiralled through childhood. By 8, she was obese, and by 11, she and her mother Fiona were seeking surgical help for a condition no diet could manage.
I couldn't live with myself if I hadn't done something. We had to do something.
What did you think was going to happen to you?
The thought of me dying at the age of 25. that was a real risk.
Why do you say 25?
Because it would just not stop.
After trying everything else, Fiona took her then 11-year-old daughter to Dr. Hopkins for gastric sleeve surgery. It was an agonising decision.
The fear of putting your child under the knife, thinking, is there another way? It has to be one of the hardest things you could ever put yourself through, let alone put your child through.
But paediatricians assessing Natasha said she was too young and forced her to wait a year. In that single year, she put on another 30 kilos, tipping the scales at 128 kilos. What was the cost to Natasha of making her wait a year?
It's almost honestly immeasurable. So we say to a young patient, we know it works, but not for you, not yet. Again, I'm saying, what are we waiting for?
14-year-old Ashley Young can't wait any longer. Tomorrow, she's flying to Brisbane for an operation she hopes will not only be life-saving, but life-changing, physically and psychologically. The issues that you're dealing with, do you believe that losing the weight is going to solve all that?
It's just one big problem in a bucket full of little ones. But if I get rid of that big one, it's just going to be easier for me to get rid of the little ones.
Yeah, you having any second thoughts?
No. Mum, I was talking to Mum before, she's like, you know you can pull out any time. I'm like, no.
I'll be here, giving it my best shot, baby.
For all of Ashley's enthusiasm, this is an irreversible step and a serious surgical operation.
Let's do it.
The next 40 minutes will determine the rest of Ashley's life.
I can't be gentle about this. I've got to go up and leave it so that there's no remnant stomach at the top of the stomach, because that's where the capacity is.
But with the removal of so much of the stomach comes a much reduced capacity to absorb vital nutrients. And even for supporters of this type of surgery, that raises concerns.
I think what I'm concerned about is what's happening in the long term.
Professor John Dixon is part of an international research team into the risks of gastric sleeve surgery on young people.
The gastric sleeve's only been around about 10 years. I would have liked there to be some really good data on the gastric sleeve, really good information about how it affects adults' health over time before we translate that down to young people.
Professor Dixon's initial studies suggest teenagers who've had the surgery face an increased risk of the sometimes deadly bone disease osteoporosis, as well as depression and a greater risk of alcohol dependency.
It's incumbent upon the surgeon and the patient to understand that these effects have to be watched, at least for the first decade, so that we know what needs to be kept up with.
With the surgery complete, Ashley is left with a stomach the size of this tube. But that is seriously a tiny bit of stomach that's left.
That is a seriously tiny bit of stomach that's left.
George's job is done. Now it's all up to Ashley. In the months and years ahead, she must use her new tiny stomach wisely and re-establish a healthy relationship with food. And she does. 2 years on, Ashley is nearly 17, has a boyfriend, and life, it seems, has turned around. Well, look at you. I think you're half the woman I met.
Yeah, after the surgery, it just fell right off and it's changed me completely.
Ashley has dropped from over 100 kilos to a healthy 55. And what size are you?
I range probably from a 8 to a 10.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be about 18, sometimes 20, 22.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a transformation 13-year-old Natasha dreams of too. 6 months ago, she had the gastric sleeve surgery. So far, she's lost 30 kilos,
Seeing I've had the surgery, it's a little bit better now.
but wants to lose another 30.
You can taste things, but because you're not attached to them in your head anymore, it changes it.
And Ashley is her support on a journey that's far more difficult than it may seem.
I've never seen myself skinny. And I was scared of what I was going to look like. Because I've always seen myself as this big, just person with just covered in fat, basically.
She's alive. And that's, at the end of the day, that's it. She's alive. I've got my daughter back.
Do you feel like you're back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit more of an annoying person, though.
You are?
Less anger, more annoying.
You're more fun.
Yeah, more fun but annoying.
Yeah.
Is there any obese child who is too young for you to operate on?
Look, absolutely, but don't ask me what that age group would be, because had you asked me that 5 years ago, I almost certainly would have said 16. If you asked me that 2 years ago, I probably would have said 11 or 12. I'm not sure the surgery will happen in people under the age of 10, but we will be asked for it.
2 years ago, at 100 kilos, Ashley was morbidly obese. Now she's George's model patient.
55.6. And tell me you're happy with that.
I'm happy with that. You really have given me a second life, a whole new chance. It's like the old me's dead.
The change on the outside is dramatic enough, but it's the change on the inside that's really noticeable. Ashley is no longer friends with food. She's finally made friends with herself. Have your psychological problems been repaired by the surgery?
They have. I'm completely off the anxiety medication, off the depression pills. I'm just a normal girl, and that's something I've always dreamed of. I really like it.
It looks lovely. You know, when we last met you, you didn't like what you saw in the mirror. If you take a look now, tell me, what do you see?
I see a big change. I see someone who's happy, who loves life, who wants to go experience everything in the world. I see someone who's really happy.